Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, the Fed makes cuts amid a slowing job market.
For some part of the committee, you know, it's time to maybe take a step back and see whether there really are downside risks to the labor market, or see whether, in fact, the growth, the stronger growth that we're seeing is real.
The comments from Fed Chair Jay Powell this afternoon, looking to shore up a softening job market. What Powell said about today's cut, and more importantly, what he said about a potential December cut that caused the markets to dip today, when we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael McKee, who was in the room. Plus, fresh congressional reaction when we speak with Senate Finance Committee member Senator James Lankford just moments from now. Also, we're now just hours away from that highly anticipated Trump-Xi meeting. The two leaders expected to formalize a trade truce after months of chaos, potentially putting the world's biggest trade fight on hold, at least for now. We'll speak with Illinois Congressman and top Democrat on the China Select Committee, Krishnamoorthi, and Foreign Relations Committee member Senator Chris Coons on that and more. Also, Nvidia breaking records, becoming the world's first $5 trillion company today. That news coming as we get earnings reports from the likes of Meta, Alphabet, and Microsoft just after the close. We'll dig into it all with Bloomberg Tech's Caroline Hyde up ahead. But we begin this evening with a high-stakes meeting expected to happen less than 5 hours from now. President Trump sitting down with China's Xi Jinping. The stakes could not be higher as the two leaders look to cool their heated trade rhetoric and pause the tariff war that's been going on now for months. From soybeans to fentanyl, everything seems to be on the table tonight. And Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall reports now the latest live from South Korea. Tyler, what do you have?
Yeah, hey, Joe, good evening. You laid it out there. The stakes could not be higher here on the ground in South Korea. Now, we are widely expecting that there will be an extension when it comes to the trade truce currently in place and set to expire on November 10th. And that's seemingly in exchange for a pullback in some of the recent escalations that have happened in the weeks leading up to this. That includes Bloomberg News confirming that China has begun to purchase U.S. soybeans, though the numbers as of now are relatively small compared to the nearly $12.6 billion worth of imports they did last harvest season alone. Also, according to the Treasury Secretary, Beijing will delay its newly unveiled export curbs on critical and rare earth minerals. And the U.S. is taking some similar steps, too, taking off the table, it appears, some threatened but not yet imposed restrictions when it comes to things like critical software and cloud computing. Now, I mentioned there could be an extension to the trade truce. We could also see a reduction in the tariffs that are currently in place. President Trump suggesting as much himself, saying that he could lower the 20% tariff that is linked specifically to fentanyl, as both sides have said they made progress around the issue. And then, of course, President Trump raising the stakes even higher today, earlier telling reporters that he is going to bring up Nvidia's Blackwell chips with the Chinese president later on. Now, of course, this is something that would be seen as a market plus when it comes to Nvidia, which has been trying to regain market access to China since at least 2022. Now, Joe, there's a lot on the table. A lot hasn't been finalized yet, including what the administration would say about some potential critics when it comes to national security concerns over any potential sales of Nvidia chips. But I have to say, covering President Trump here on the ground, it is clear that the White House is trying to gain as much leverage as possible going into this meeting. Joe, today, the U.S. inked this trade deal with South Korea, of course, focused on those critical sectors when it comes to competing with Beijing.
Tyler, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall reporting live from South Korea, and we'll have much more for us tomorrow on the meeting. To the other big story we're following now, the Fed decision to cut rates by a 0.25 percentage point, the central bank's second consecutive rate cut as the Fed moves to support a softening labor market. The Fed also said it would stop shrinking its portfolio of assets on December 1st. And Fed Chair Jay Powell said another rate cut in December is not guaranteed. Take a listen.
We continue to face two-sided risks. In the committee's discussions at this meeting, there were strongly differing views about how to proceed in December. A further reduction in the policy rate at the December meeting is not a foregone conclusion. Far from it.
And joining us now with details of today's Fed decision is a man who was in the room with the Fed chair, Bloomberg's Michael McKee. It's great to see you on a Fed day in Washington, as always. Mike, you told us on the early edition of Balance of Power that this is exactly what the Fed chair would say. And so what to do with December in a dearth of economic data?
I think it's more than the dearth of economic data, although that complicates their job quite a bit. I think it's that they really don't know where inflation is going because of the tariff situation. I mean, Tyler could be reporting a whole new change in tariffs by the time we wake up tomorrow morning. And we don't know what the employment situation is going to be. AI seems to be driving a lot of job cut announcements these days. Are we going to see the unemployment rate shoot up? They just don't know, and they probably aren't going to know or have a really good idea of what's going to happen by December. So what Powell seems to be telling us is there's enough opposition to a December rate cut. More people would like to have them sit still and wait and pause and see what effect their rate cuts are having and what is happening in the economy before they go again.
The administration has gone out of its way, Treasury Secretary, the president, everyone in between, that tariffs are not inflationary. Jay Powell said today very simply and directly, higher tariffs are pushing up prices in some categories of goods, resulting in higher overall inflation. So who's wrong?
The administration's wrong. Tariffs are a tax, and they are inflationary. They do push up prices. The question is, how long does that inflation last? The argument that the Fed is buying is that it will be a sort of one-off event. Now, it's not going to be one day, as it was when Smoot-Hawley went into effect. It's going to be each time the tariffs come on to a different sector, they will slowly raise prices as companies adjust. But then they stop. Still, it leaves you with higher prices overall, and that is an affordability problem, a political problem as well.
Fascinating as ever. Bloomberg's Michael McKee on this Fed Day in Washington. We thank you, Mike, and joining us now live from Capitol Hill is Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, who serves on both the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and Senate Appropriations Committee. We come back full circle to our top story, Senator, and that's the president's meeting tomorrow with Xi Jinping. It's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I wonder if you are optimistic for what could come from a trade deal with the world's second largest economy, or if you're in fact worried that the president could somehow mortgage our national security with the idea of dealing around high-end AI chips made by Nvidia.
Well, Joe, thank you for the chance to be on again. I am gravely concerned that President Trump fails to appreciate what a permanent advantage he would be giving away if he is to greenlight the sale of Nvidia's advanced Blackwell chips. They're a dozen times more powerful than the H20 chips that he's already allowed Nvidia to sell to the People's Republic of China. And this would allow the Chinese to gain an advantage over us in training new AI models, in threatening our safety, our industry, our military advantage. It would make their missiles more powerful. It would allow them to carry out more effective cyber attacks on our businesses and our national security infrastructure. It frankly would make China a far more lethal competitor to the United States. And in exchange for what? For a temporary advantage in the sale of soybeans or a temporary benefit in terms of rare earths or critical minerals. As you know, President Trump recently had a successful meeting with the Prime Minister of Australia. We have several close allies, Australia, Canada, Norway, that have abundant critical minerals and rare earths. We should be moving forward with closer partnerships with them, not selling the farm to China.
So what should be President Trump's posture tomorrow in this meeting, Senator? You just took off the list. You took off the table exactly what Xi Jinping is looking for. He'd love to have more than the H20 chip, apparently. And you've got Jensen Huang in President Trump's ear saying that the U.S.-made stack should be adopted around the world if we want to win this AI race. How do you rationalize these two?
Because the key difference here is that these Blackwell level chips allow the Chinese to train new models. With DeepSeek, they've already shown that they've got a significant competitive edge in the intellectual capability, in power, in energy, in the data set that they're able to access because of the size of their population. AI is absolutely critical to the competition of the 21st century, economic, political, social, and military. So I would not put that on the table. I would instead continue to talk about traditional commodity relationships, about reducing fentanyl exports, increasing soybean purchases, lowering tariffs in a way that can help both countries and both economies. But to give away these chips is to give away the keys to the kingdom and the one area where the United States still has a critical competitive advantage in the race to AI.
Well, this very idea was enough to send Nvidia stock to an all-time high once again today, Senator. So we'll all be listening very closely to what happens here. And I'd love for your point of view still on the Foreign Relations Committee to give us your sense of what is happening in the Caribbean and the effort to have a War Powers Act passed in the United States Senate. The president has announced, the administration has announced any number of additional boats that have been destroyed now on the Pacific side, which is interesting. We had been seeing this off the coast of Venezuela. Now apparently it is including Colombia as well. The president has also acknowledged the fact that there was a covert CIA operation approved for on-the-ground operations inside Venezuela. What are we on the threshold of here, Senator, if nothing less than regime change or an actual war in Venezuela?
Well, Joe, that's a great question to which we in the Senate don't have a clear answer. It is an indicator of a steady march towards regime change. The size and scale of the flotilla that President Trump has directed to deploy to the southern Caribbean, the more than dozen strikes that have killed nearly 60 people in both the Eastern Pacific and Southern Caribbean. Look, I'm no fan of Maduro. He's a brutal dictator who's driven his country into poverty and pushed millions of Venezuelans to flee. But intentionally, through military action on the ground, overthrowing a head of state of another country has serious consequences. And the president owes the American people and Congress, given our critical Article I power, an explanation of what's the policy and what's the plan. What will happen on the day after? I don't need to cite more than Libya and Iraq to give you examples where action initiated by the United States and our allies overthrew a stable government, although a brutal authoritarian government, and we did not have a clear plan for the day after, and the consequences for both the people of Libya and Iraq and for regional stability have been tragic. We should not sleepwalk into war. In closing, I'll remind you, President Trump ran on lowering people's costs, making America healthy again, and no new foreign wars. Costs are going up because of the tax known as tariffs. Health insurance costs are going to skyrocket starting this weekend. And I'm afraid President Trump is leading us slowly into a war with Venezuela. None of these are what he promised, and all of them we should step back from or change direction from.
Senator Coons, it's day 29 of the government shutdown, and we have a couple of headlines coming from the Senate leader, Republican leader John Thune's office. Number one is that he's preparing to, or seems to be on the threshold of, talking with Democrats. There's also an effort to fund SNAP benefits, food stamps, with a couple of different versions of the legislation. There's a Republican and I believe 2 Democratic versions. Listen to what John Thune said about this earlier today.
They're going to propose a bill to fund food stamps during their shutdown. Mr. President, this request is a transparent admission that Democrats want to keep the shutdown for what? Another month? Longer? This bill is a cynical attempt to provide political cover for Democrats to allow them to carry on their government shutdown for the long term.
To be clear, Senator, there is a Republican version as well that's been put forth by Josh Hawley to fund SNAP benefits during the shutdown. Where do you fall on this idea of paying some people paychecks, federal workers, fulfilling some programs but not others, as opposed to actually reopening the government and getting everyone back on board? Would you vote for this?
Well, Joe, I think we should reopen the government, and we should have Republicans at the table willing to negotiate with Democrats. The House has been out of session 40 days. President Trump's on the other side of the world. Leader Thune is refusing to negotiate with us until after we reopen the government. And I think Republicans need to show that they are committed to changing course on the rising health care costs that millions of Americans are facing. That's what should happen before we reopen the government. It's not that hard. They just need to sit down and negotiate with us. But the posture that Leader Thune has taken throughout this entire period has been he will not negotiate with us until the government's reopened. There was an effort on the floor today by Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico to ask for consent that we would fund SNAP and WIC so that hungry Americans won't suffer in the coming week or weeks. I support that. I'm going to be attempting tomorrow to get unanimous consent to pay our troops, those who are active duty, Guard, Reserve, Coast Guard, civilians. I think what you're seeing here is steady movement towards trying to reopen the government in exchange for real constructive negotiations on avoiding the spike in health care costs that's facing all Americans by the end of this year, and particularly high spikes for those who are on the Affordable Care Act.
Well, Senator, we appreciate your view. Chris Coons of Delaware, thank you, as always, for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Coming up, this shutdown and more on today's Fed decision when we spend some time with Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. And later this hour, we'll look ahead to tonight's historic summit between President Trump and China's Xi Jinping with Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, ranking member on the House China Select Committee. It's all ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I expect to be lowering that because I believe that they're going to help us with the fentanyl situation. They're going to be doing what they can do. But we have to have the meeting. Our meeting tomorrow. That's a big meeting. And fentanyl will be one of the things that we're discussing. Importantly, we'll be discussing the farmers. We'll be discussing a lot of things. But fentanyl will be one of the things we're discussing.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. That, of course, the president teeing up his meeting with China's Xi Jinping, speaking with reporters on Air Force One. That meeting now less than 5 hours away, with the president saying that he could lower tariffs the U.S. has imposed on Chinese goods over the fentanyl crisis. Big shift in the administration's trade position. That's news. Joining us now with his perspective live from Capitol Hill on this and other matters, Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, member of the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. Senator, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Joe. Should export controls be on the table for this conversation?
Yeah, we should put everything on the table to actually have real conversations about what we're going to actually bring in and out. We buy a lot of toys and a lot of different products from China, but we're also dependent on them for critical minerals. They're dependent on us for energy and a lot of other products that are coming that way. So let's talk about it.
Well, of course, Blackwell chips made by Nvidia are not toys, Senator, and there are a lot of concerns about the advantage that could provide the Chinese in the AI race. Does it worry you that they could have their hands on that technology?
Yeah, it does worry me. Actually, they shouldn't, and we don't. We currently have limitations on that particular product based on the advantage that they could gain from it. We are far ahead on the AI frame, but we want to make sure that we stay that way. When you're a rival like we are with China, we want to be able to make sure that we keep our competitive advantage.
Well, I mean, you know, Nvidia shareholders today were counting the dollars to see what it would actually be like to reopen the Chinese market, and the stock hit an all-time high on this expectation. It sounds like you're tapping the brakes on this idea, though. Do you think the president would make that offer?
Yeah, we'll see what the president makes the offer on. He's smart enough to be able to know just exactly what that would mean long term. If you're going to keep American competitive advantage, we need to be able to keep American competitive advantage in every area on that, but especially in technology and innovation. We understand full well what the Chinese are doing, both in their military capabilities, but also what they're working on with quantum, what they're working on AI, all of those different aspects as well. The Nvidia chip is actually exceptionally valuable to the United States in maintaining that advantage. We'd like to be able to keep it that way, and should.
Is it worth it, though, if we make Oklahoma's farmers and ranchers whole in a trade deal with China that would get the soybeans and the other agricultural products flowing again?
Yeah, there are a lot of other ways to be able to negotiate dealing with soybeans and trying to be able to open up to beef and to pork and so many different agricultural products that China has agreed to be able to purchase in the past and then broke their deal on that. So I don't want to be able to open up the chips. Once those chips actually get there, then they could just break the deal again and walk away, and they've already got access to the chips that they need for it. So we need to be very attentive and very, very careful in any kind of negotiation that deals with high technology like that.
I'd love to ask you, Senator, about the government shutdown as well. We were just talking to your colleague from Delaware, Chris Coons, about it. It's day 29 here, and there was an important headline, John Thune suggesting that he's going to meet with Democrats. He said that opportunity would arise soon. I don't know if he means Chuck Schumer or if we're talking about other members of the Democratic coalition in the Senate. But would that suggest the end is in sight, or are we going to set a new record next week?
I hope it is. We've already set a new record. This is the longest full government shutdown. Previous times, we've had what's called a partial government shutdown, where part was funded and part was not funded. This time, nothing has been funded. No. And we have actually attempted multiple times to try to get funding, even to part of the government, and Democrats have refused to do all of this. This reminds me a lot of 2013. In 2013, Republicans at that time were complaining about Obamacare. We shut down the government for 2 weeks. Democrats over and over again said we will not negotiate anything on health care while the government is shut down. Now, literally a decade later, we now have a situation where Democrats have shut down the government over Obamacare. They want to add more money to Obamacare. Republicans have said, no, we're not going to talk about this while the government is shut down. But it's been a month now, and now we're bumping into SNAP being cut off, federal workers missing yet another paycheck. We've got all kinds of repercussions that are happening around the country. And for whatever reason, my Democratic colleagues have not been able to decide what they want as the end to the shutdown. There's at least 3 or 4 different proposals that are sitting out there, and they've not been able to circle around and be able to bring John Thune. Here's what we're looking for in it.
I know that you've become heavily invested in a couple of bills that helping to solve the shutdown here. One of them, in fact, would fund SNAP programs and air traffic controllers. Can you pass it if it gets to the floor?
Probably. Trying to be able to figure out the best way to do this. The problem is that still leaves out federal housing and all those folks on housing assistance. That still leaves out the members of our military. That leaves out all kinds of different folks, our Indian tribes. Anytime you start picking and choosing which one of your children you like the best, you run into all kinds of problems on that. This is literally Democrats saying, well, we want this constituency, but not that one. We're saying, listen, just open it. Enough is enough. We're saying literally the same thing that federal employee unions are saying to Democrats. We get your point. You don't like President Trump. Everybody hears you. You don't like President Trump. But why are you punishing all these different people that are not affected by all this? You don't like President Trump. Everybody understands that. But we don't need to be able to punish SNAP recipients nor federal workers and their families in this process. You mentioned those bills. I actually have a bill last year I brought that actually ends government shutdowns entirely. This particular shutdown, our GDP will lose at least $8 billion in GDP, at least, just from the loss that will happen during this time period. We need to end government shutdowns entirely. I had 57 votes for that last year. We hope as soon as this shutdown is over, we can bring that back up again and say, let's make our last shutdown we ever have, and to make sure that we keep flat funding when we get to a moment like this. We stay in session continuously until we solve our problems, but keep the pressure on Congress, not on federal workers and not on SNAP recipients.
Understood. Senator, thank you for being with us. Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma on day 29 of our government shutdown. President Trump is truthing, remembering, of course, he's going to be sitting down with President Xi in just about 4.5 hours. This just hitting Truth Social following his visit to South Korea, which he says has agreed to pay the USA $350 billion for a lowering of the tariff, he says, charged against them by the U.S. Additionally, agreed to buy our oil and gas in vast quantities, and investments into our country by wealthy South Korean companies and businessmen, he says, will exceed $600 billion. On China, the president posting on Truth Social in anticipation of the meeting. Very much looking forward to my meeting with President Xi of China. It will take place in a few hours. President DJT. We are just hours away from the president's meeting, and we'll have much more ahead right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us as we follow breaking news here after the bell. 3 of the Mag 7, Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft, all dropping earnings reports tonight, quarterly results after the close. Not all are made the same, as noted by Investor Reaction here. And joining us now with Power Moves, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Caroline, it's great to see you. You want to start with the good news or the bad news?
Well, let's go good news, because Alphabet's the only standout here, and it was trading at a record high today, and it goes yet higher in after-hours trading, as you point out, Joe. And this is as we're rewarding the company that is showing growth in cloud. Remember, Google is the number 3 after the likes of Amazon and Microsoft, but they're managing to bake in more than 30% growth in terms of their overall cloud offering. They're really being seen as the key competitor, having recently won over Anthropic, that's also been relying on AWS, for example. But we're also notably seeing that the advertising part of the business is still going great guns. That's even as we concerned about maybe the search competition that's coming from the likes of OpenAI. That's not showing up in the numbers, so people still driving Alphabet shares higher. So I think that's a notable winner. And actually, we're rewarding capital expenditure that gets raised again. Fiscal second quarter, we saw them rise to $85 billion for their capex for the full year. Now they're going up to $92 billion, Joe. So a reward here for Alphabet, but not so much for the others.
Not so much for the others, indeed, and they're being punished for it. That's the environment that we're in. Nvidia, on the other hand, continues to reach to the sky, Caroline. Jensen Huang is the $5 trillion man. Is this all about the speech yesterday?
It's about the speech, and it's about what's going to happen in just a few hours. You've been talking about relentlessly, Joe. It's really important to keep thinking about Xi and Trump. What will get discussed in terms of the future iteration of Blackwell, the architecture that might well have to be dumbed down to ship into China, but does that help him access that market? At the moment, he is managing to point to $500 billion worth of sales of both Blackwell and Rubin, the next iteration of his chips overall offering that we have in terms of servers as well, and the entire software tech stack. He's saying that he's got $500 billion of orders for those key offerings, with 0 going to China. If he can start selling into China, that just pushes him higher. It'll be interesting to see how Nvidia reacts, though, to some of the numbers that we saw coming out of Microsoft and Meta. Now, Microsoft, of course, is being a bit punished today, but they, too, are refocusing on capital expenditure, rewarding Nvidia really is the GPU king for them. They've been going not only to their own overall Azure growth, which they did beat in terms of expectations. They saw 39% growth in terms of their Azure cloud, but they're also having to rely on Nscale and Nebius and some neo clouds, because supply is the constraint, not demand. So with Microsoft still committing to capital expenditure, Meta too also saying 2026 is going to look even bigger for capital expenditure for them than 2025. Look, the shares of Meta are actually falling on the back of its numbers, even though we saw record revenue. We did see a tax implication on their earnings per share. But once again, maybe with Meta and Microsoft, we're not seeing the sort of rewards that Alphabet got. Remember, a lot of these companies have been trading at record highs, and a lot of them have significantly outperformed on the year. But it still seems to be a tale of two cities as to who we're going to push share prices higher of. But for now, Nvidia just keeps catching that bid. 73 analysts say buy it. Only 1 says sell.
Incredible moment we're in. Caroline Hyde, what a treat to spend some time with the co-host of Bloomberg Tech. Thank you, Caroline, for setting us up here. You can catch Caroline, by the way, alongside Ed Ludlow every morning. I suggest you do. 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific here on Bloomberg TV. Back to our top story tonight, the impending meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi in South Korea. We're just hours away. The president posting on Truth Social just moments ago saying, quote, very much looking forward to my meeting with President Xi of China. It will take place in a few hours, unquote. Well, that's correct. The meeting soon coming after President signaled that he was open to providing China with access to what Caroline was just talking about, Nvidia's Blackwell GPUs, as part of a trade deal, presumably would represent a major concession if this happened. Take a listen to what the president said to get all the talk going here, discussing the chip earlier today on Air Force One.
We'll be speaking about Blackwell as the super duper chip. Blackwell's amazing. Nvidia makes it. And Jensen is an amazing, brilliant man. I think we may be talking about that with President Xi.
Joining us now with his reaction to this and more, Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. He's ranking member on the House China Select Committee, which is why we have talked about this very idea before in terms of export controls, just not for Blackwell. Congressman, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Is this about to happen?
I hope not. I hope that they think better of this particular issue because, look, we can't export our highest-end semiconductor chips to China. It doesn't make any sense. They will be used to help modernize the Chinese military and be used to perfect their AI models and their surveillance and other systems that are used to persecute Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and dissidents. This not only is bad for our national security, it runs counter to our values. And so I hope that they do not relax the export controls on the Blackwell chips or any other super duper chips that we might have.
Well, to be honest, I thought being tough on China was the last bipartisan activity left here in Washington, D.C. Congressman, we just had two senators, a Democrat in Chris Coons, a Republican in James Lankford, say basically what you just said as well, questioning this idea, suggesting that the president should reconsider. So why is this happening?
I don't know. I think that the president should listen to his advisors. He should not shoot from the hip on this particular issue. Look, I think that when he does this, he reveals weakness and lowers our deterrence with regard to economic, military, and technological aggression by the Chinese Communist Party. And when that happens, you basically invite aggression and potentially conflict. We don't want that. The American people do not want a conflict. They don't want a war. They don't want anything like that with China. And so let us instead go a different route. We have leverage. I hope the president uses that leverage to his advantage. The biggest source of leverage that he has is access to the American market. The Chinese desperately want access to the American market. We want to bring stability and predictability in that relationship. We want the Chinese Communist Party to lower their shipments of fentanyl precursors that fuel our fentanyl epidemic. We want them to, of course, continue to buy soybeans from Illinois and American farmers. And we want them to stop the dumping, which they continually do, to basically destroy their competitors here in America and among our friends, partners, and allies elsewhere.
You know, Jensen Huang had the Capitol wrapped yesterday with his keynote address at Nvidia GTC, and he has made the point, I'm sure he's told you this personally, Congressman, that the world needs to be on the U.S. stack if we're going to win the AI race, suggesting that otherwise the world could be on a Huawei stack and China could find itself in an advantaged position. We've got competing philosophies here. Is there some truth to what Huang is saying, and is the president about to make that happen?
Well, look, this is what I told Jensen in my office when he told me the exact same thing. Yeah. Guess what, Jensen? They are already trying to make a Huawei stack that will replace your stack. And they're going to continue to do so relentlessly. And then they're going to cut you out as well as soon as they learn everything they can from your technology. So let's be very clear-eyed about this situation. Among our friends, partners, and allies, we need to make sure that we don't either export our highest-end semiconductor chips to be used by the CCP, or any equipment that could be used to fabricate those chips, or any other technology or know-how that could be used against us. That's just the nature of this particular situation. We got to maintain our lead. Whatever we can do to expand our partnerships among trusted partners, let's do that. But let's not give away the store to the CCP. They will use it against us, just as they have with every other technology out there.
Just lastly on this, and I'll change the subject to the government shutdown here in a moment, Congressman. That's news. What was his reaction when you told Jensen Huang that the Chinese were going to cut him out? And did he tell you that he was hoping to sell Blackwells in Beijing?
No, not necessarily. I don't want to get into all the details of our conversation, except that he and I obviously disagree on this topic. But I have to look out, as my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats alike, for the best interests, the best national security interests of our country. And all I could say to President Trump is this, which is, look, this is one area where we maintain a lead, that we will continue to maintain a lead on, but it only will exist if we don't kind of do damage to our standing by exporting these chips to the CCP. And by the way, we have to continue to fix other parts of our ecosystem. So for instance, upskilling our American workers to work at places like Nvidia, as well as fixing our legal immigration system so that the best and the brightest can continue to man the fabs. and we invest in our research and development here in the United States, which unfortunately is being hollowed out as we speak by the Trump administration. And so I'm concerned about those issues, but we can maintain the lead. We can win this competition if we be the best version of ourselves.
Congressman, the House has been out of session, I believe, for over a month at this point. It might even be more than 40 days. I'm starting to lose count, although it is day 29 of the government shutdown. And we've been exploring ideas here this hour on how this might end, although we're coming up pretty short here based on the conversations that are being had in Washington. Listen to what the Speaker of the House had to say a bit earlier. This is Mike Johnson.
We're all concerned about the timing. The Democrats are eating up the clock. We have very important work to do here, and that's why we're pleading with them, not Chuck Schumer. Look, I think Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are irredeemable at this point. I don't think they'll be able to tell Mondami in New York and his disciples that they voted to open the government. I've given up on the leadership. So we're trying to appeal to a handful of moderates or centrists who care more about the American people and will put the people's interests over their own and do the right thing in the Senate. I mean, there's no point in me sitting down with Chuck Schumer. He's painted himself into a corner.
So he just said a lot there, Congressman. Here on day 29, you hear the references. This is the Schumer shutdown. This is what Republicans say. And, of course, Democrats, as you will probably tell me, say that they haven't had a chance to sit down and negotiate with Republicans. But we are coming up. The timing is difficult on this date of November 1st when SNAP benefits begin to expire and when open enrollment begins. Will that be the date that brings this shutdown to a close? Or are you and I going to be talking about this over turkey on Thanksgiving?
I hope not. And Mike Johnson, God bless him. He can just call us back into session today. But I think the reason he doesn't is because two things. One, I think the president doesn't want him to call us back into session because shutting down the government also shuts down the Epstein file inquiry. As you know, if we get called into session, Adelita Grijalva from Arizona gets sworn in, and she's the 218th vote to force the legislation to come to the floor to make the president disclose the Epstein files. That's point number one. Point number two is this, which is that, look, the president and his party controls all branches of government at this point. That's why public sentiment is really turned against Republicans on the shutdown. They want the president to come to the table. Don't spend time building a golden ballroom. Come to the table, and we can solve the shutdown in 10 minutes flat. I guarantee you that Leader Jeffries and Leader Schumer will be ready to go, and we can solve this, extend the Obamacare tax credits, avoid these exploding health care premiums. We can solve this in probably 5 to 10 minutes, I think.
You know what Republicans say, though, Congressman, is that you need to reopen the government to negotiate, and that they have voted 13 times to reopen the government. Democrats have voted no.
They've voted 50 times to repeal Obamacare. They've voted numerous times to defund Obamacare. We know exactly where they stand on the Affordable Care Act. You can't trust them with the Affordable Care Act. And so let us take that issue off the table right now. We have 22 million people who are about to receive notices because they can't otherwise afford Obamacare without those tax credits. 4 million Americans are about to lose the ACA coverage because those healthcare premiums will be beyond their reach. And so let's just take it off the table right now.
Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. It's good to see you, Congressman. Thank you for joining, as always. Coming up, we'll continue the conversation on the impending summit between President Xi, President Trump, with our political panel, and how Democrats are using the president's ballroom construction as a shutdown talking point. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. We'll turn back to the impending meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi in a moment. First, today's Power Brief. Voters in the Netherlands are casting their ballots in a snap election focused on issues like affordable housing and reining in immigration. Might sound familiar, with progressive Democrats and the far right set for a tie. Mainstream parties ruling out a potential coalition due to an anti-Islam lawmaker, Geert Wilders, backing out of a four-way ruling coalition over a dispute over immigration, an issue that continues to polarize Dutch voters. More clarity on the outcome of the race is expected throughout the night and into tomorrow morning. And tonight, while Democrats and Republicans stick to their shutdown talking points 29 days in, the president's ballroom construction is coming under attack. Again, with Democrats now increasing their probes of the construction and the fundraising effort behind it. Here's Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer earlier today.
So what's Trump doing? He's busy building his ballroom, dancing in Malaysia, sending $40 billion to Argentina, $300 million for his ballroom, $170 million in luxury jets for Kristi Noem. They have money for that and not for health care.
Joining us now with their reaction to this story and more, this evening's political panel. Roger Fisk, former aide to President Obama, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Annalise Keller, partner at 7 Letter. Wonderful to see you both, and welcome. Does Chuck Schumer have a point?
I don't think so. It's on Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
He's got to get those votes in the Senate. This is where the logjam has been. They've got, I mean, you're totally right. Republicans and Democrats have stuck to their talking points.
Sure.
The one that's most interesting to me is this talking point that Republicans can go it alone. They control Congress. They control the presidency. Thus, they can reopen the government. I think we all know that's not true and that it takes 60 votes in the Senate, unless you want to get rid of the filibuster, which I mean, Republicans don't. I don't. That's a terrible idea. So we've got to get Democrats to figure out what their off-ramp is here. What are they going to take as a win? How are we going to get this reopened? Because this is the longest shutdown in history of the entire government.
That's right.
And next week, people are really going to feel it with the expiration of SNAP benefits. You know, my husband's a federal worker. We've missed paychecks. People are hurting. People are missing paychecks, and there's real consequences to this.
Well, the minority leader, I think, was also referring to the optics here of the president with the Argentine bailout, the building of the ballroom, the demolition of the East Wing, and whatever is going to come from this trade meeting tomorrow with President Xi. Roger, is this a good look?
First off, thanks for having me. And It's wonderful to be on with Annalise. It's a temporary kind of constellation of optics that I think play to the detriment of the White House. I could make a joke that if the shutdown goes on much longer, I mean, maybe the bulldozers pull over to the West Wing too or something, who knows.
That's going to happen.
But I do think the next 10 days will be pivotal. And the way I see the pressures kind of playing out, if you look at the government employees union peeling off, and then you look at the premiums that are now coming out in 2/3 of the states with more information coming. I think the pressure on the Democrats is going to come from inside their coalition, and I think the pressure on the Republicans is going to come from outside their coalition, with a couple exceptions, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yes.
And then I think on an operational level, the conversations that really are going to matter are on the second tier below leadership. So it won't be the Thunes, it'll be the Barrassos and the Kanes and the Warners and maybe the Angus Kings that don't have the public burden of leadership and have a little bit more room for these conversations.
Sure.
Because the politics of this are such that the Republicans still, to this day, don't have an answer for what they want to replace Obamacare with. So in a sense, they could hold the line and then give some kind of concession towards maintaining the support for the subsidies for another year, which would answer then the question of what do we do when Obamacare goes away. And of course, the Democrats want SNAP and everything else to go back to level funding, et cetera. So there's a way, if you got everyone together, that the politics of this could actually play out well for both sides.
Really interesting. There's your 10-day plan from Roger Fisk. Others have suggested
for free.
That was for free. Thank you. That an air traffic controller walkout would end the shutdown that same day. Are we in store for a move like that?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's difficult. I've seen some flights that have been grounded and some issues across airports. That pressure is absolutely going to ratchet up, especially if we get into the Thanksgiving holiday. I mean, people are really going to be feeling the pressure. I want to key off on Roger's point, though, about some of the more rank and file senators getting together to find a solution here, because I think that's a great point. And something that has been interesting to me is how the Senate has been recessing for weekends. And a lot of times what builds some of this pressure, unfortunately, is locking them in the chamber and making them vote. I mean, they voted 13 times on a measure to reopen the government. But, sometimes you need that pressure of the Friday, the Saturday, the Sunday, not going home and then coming back kind of refreshed.
James Lankford bills also, Lankford's bill keeps them from using taxpayer money to travel. So you're truly locking them in Washington, to your point, might generate some reaction. This is happening, by the way, as the president is abroad. Chuck Schumer keeps reminding us that the president is in Asia, and although I guess he could use the auto pen if he needed to, Roger. But let's talk about
all presidents
this meeting.
do, by the way.
That's true. This meeting takes place 10 p.m. Eastern time. What kind of a gift does President Xi need to bring Donald Trump? I mean that literally.
Both. First off, I'm rooting for the president. Whenever I'm still old-fashioned. Whenever I'm abroad or whenever the president's abroad, I'm still rooting for them. That said, both Putin and Xi are very astute when it comes to what motivates the president of the United States. And Putin appeals more to personal flattery and plays, derogatory comments about the media and things like that. Xi knows that every bone in the president's body is going to want to walk out of that room and announce something immediately.
Yes, right.
Which, in real diplomacy, you usually just reference kind of progress, et cetera, because you never want to get ahead of a massive diplomatic deal. But it's going to be something surgical, and it's going to be something that the president can turn around and announce, for example, a large purchase of soybeans in exchange for the chips or some kind of access or a willingness to have conversations about this. The president does this quite often, for example, in the first term when he suspended military actions or exercises with South Korea before he walked into the talks with Kim Jong-un. So the question really is like, how prepared can his team get him, and how much can they get him to realize that sometimes being somewhat restrained in terms of his appetite for the optics and the announcement of a big deal the second he walks out that door might actually play better for him in the long run.
That's really interesting. What's your thought on this Blackwell chip from Nvidia suddenly being on the table? Democrats and Republicans on this show this hour have questioned this with regard to national security. Is this a bad idea?
I think there are real national security concerns and to ensure that we remain ahead in the AI innovation space. So, I think that we need to be careful with what we're offering and how we're playing that. I think I agree with Roger here. I think Trump is going to want to come out and be very proactive with he's already teased this deal, right? He said, I think everyone's going to be very happy. There's this framework. He's speaking very positively about this. So, I think we will have to see what the contours of this actually look like. And if they do include something that gives American innovation and gives an edge to China, I think you will see a lot of Republicans and Democrats sort of echoing the calls that you heard earlier with concern.
We're out of time, Roger. If China gets the Blackwell, did Donald Trump win or lose?
Short-term win, long-term loss.
Fascinating. We're going to find out together here in the next couple of hours. Roger Fisk and Annalise Keller, thank you both for your analysis and a great conversation. And we thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll do this again tomorrow with a lot more news to report. That meeting will have just concluded when we get on with things on Bloomberg surveillance. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.